ideas seemed impossible at one point. Did you know I come from a country where practically all district heating, as well as electricity in fact, is powered by renewables? In Iceland, we have such an abundance of energy that there are heated public pools and jacuzzis in almost every town. This is me a few days ago in my favorite one right next to my home. Despite harsh weather conditions in Iceland, it's never cold inside our homes. In fact, our first instinct when it gets too warm inside is not to turn the heating down, but rather to open a window. But how is all this possible? Iceland is situated on a so-called hotspot in the mid-Atlantic ridge, providing the country with rich geothermal energy potential. Icelanders decided to make use of that potential and harness our natural resources for district heating. This turned out to be one of the best decisions we've ever made. Besides increasing our standard of living, it improved our energy security and independence, enabled equitable access to energy, and made Icelanders leading experts in geothermal. It also improved our air quality, which is now one of the best ones in Europe. You can clearly see the difference by looking at photos from our capital in 1933 and today. Last but not least, the geothermal district heating system has saved us more than $21 billion over the years, as well as 113 million tons of CO2 emissions. During the course of the 20th century, Iceland went from being one of Europe's poorest countries, dependent upon peat and imported coal for energy, to a country with high living standards where practically all stationary energy is derived from renewable resources. The decision to harness our natural resources and install a district heating system seems like an obvious choice today, especially after hearing about all the benefits. However, it wasn't as obvious of a choice for my parents just one generation ago. My dad grew up with coal heating and then oil, lacking the opportunity to switch to geothermal until 1982. In fact, it took decades to convince the Icelandic population that geothermal was the way to go. It was even one of the biggest election topics in the municipal elections in 1938. This is a campaign ad on the front page of Iceland's main newspaper in 1938. The caption reads, "Vote geothermal today," and the illustrations demonstrate the potential before and after effect on air pollution in our capital, actually quite similar to the real-life photos I just showed you. But why was there a need to campaign for geothermal district heating? Why did people remain unconvinced? Some thought it was too expensive. Others thought it was simply unnecessary. Why pursue these substantial investments and infrastructure changes when the current system seemed to be working just fine? And even more thought it was impossible. Icelanders certainly didn't possess all the scientific knowledge or expertise required before embarking on this radical mission. Fast forward to today, and it's obvious that each of these doubts proved to be completely unjustified. But why am I telling you the story of the Icelandic geothermal district heating system? Because these arguments from 85 years ago remind me of the ones used today against climate action, against the great transformation we as a global society must embark upon to secure a livable future. Not only when it comes to energy, but rather the system-wide transformation that needs to reach all corners of our societies and economies. If we overlook the past, it's easy to forget that our greatest accomplishments that once seemed impossible now appear as the most obvious choices. Although we can compare climate change to other challenges humankind has faced, it's fundamentally different in many ways. The problem we're facing is not unknown to us. There's hardly any scientific uncertainty regarding the causes, main consequences, and the ways in which we must act. And even though some of the solutions we'll need in the coming decades are still emerging, we certainly possess all the capital and technology required to kickstart the transformation in the coming years. Therefore, there's neither a lack of solutions nor the capacity needed to implement them. The only thing missing is political will, or rather, political courage. But politics can only change through the power of the people, so we must all be more courageous. Courage alone, though, won't suffice. We need to change our collective mindset. We must shift to a mindset that acknowledges the urgency of the situation, the immense power we hold to change course, and the great benefits that will provide. We just need to reset our patterns of thinking. Do you feel like all is lost? The UN scientific climate body begs to differ. According to the IPCC, it's still possible to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, but the window of opportunity is closing fast. But let's say that we fail to reach our most ambitious goal and miss the 1.5 degree mark in the long run. That's still no reason to give up. Every mitigated fraction of a degree of warming matters, especially to those on the front lines of the climate crisis and to the fragile ecosystems we depend upon for our survival. And why stop fighting now when we see so many great signs that things are heading in the right direction? We see record-breaking renewable energy spending and a dramatic reduction in the prices of renewables. For example, the costs of onshore wind and solar have fallen by about 70 and 90% since 2010. The International Energy Agency then projects that renewables will become the world's largest energy source by 2025. Do you feel like your actions are too small in the grand scheme of things? We know to achieve great things, it takes a village. In this case, all of humankind. You might feel like nothing is happening or that things are moving way too slow. But remember that change isn't always linear. Once certain leverage points are reached, even the smallest intervention can have a substantial impact. In fact, several of these leverage points have been identified for the highest emitting sectors of the economy in a recent report called the Breakthrough Effect. Scientists suggest that once these super leverage points are reached, they could trigger a cascade of tipping points, enabling positive feedback loops on a scale we can hardly imagine today. You might be part of a great transformation without realizing it. Your efforts, alongside those of everyone else working on the problem, will eventually help us make the shift from incremental changes to the exponential transformation we need. Do you feel like climate action is too expensive? It's quite the opposite, actually. According to the IPCC, the cost of actions needed to limit global warming to 2 degrees will only decrease global GDP by a few % compared to business as usual. However, when we also take into account the cost of inaction and the great direct and indirect benefits of climate action, the benefits far exceed the costs. We also know that the longer we wait, the cost of action will only increase. The most expensive action is therefore inaction. Do you feel like the changes demanded are too radical? The argument that those asking for change are asking for too much too soon simply doesn't hold up anymore, especially after the radical changes that occurred during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. For decades, those asking for change were told that it was impossible to undertake large-scale changes that touch every aspect of human life. It was impossible to stop the machine, to restrain the market. The emergency brake did not exist. But in the fight against COVID, we saw how the emergency brake was pulled and with full force. We saw unprecedented changes on our societies, economies, capital flows and international cooperation, all to protect us from a common threat. And now we're facing an even bigger threat and must pull a different kind of emergency brake. One that doesn't shut down global society temporarily, only to then continue with business as usual. This time, we must pull an emergency brake that stops us in our tracks and enables us to change course for the better. The battle against climate change is essentially a fight for survival. A fight so that humankind can thrive on Earth for years to come. But it's also a fight for a better society than the one we live in today. Why shouldn't we fight for less pollution, cheaper and more equitable access to transport, more nature and biodiversity, fewer diseases and healthier food? A net zero society isn't only the only realistic option, it's also the best one. Our greatest accomplishments didn't happen spontaneously. They only came to fruition through the resilience and determination of people that dared to dream of a new future and then did everything in their power to make it into reality. Imagine you're in Iceland in 1938. You can vote between continuing with the current infrastructure and ways of living or investing in a future of geothermal energy. Some say it's too expensive, too radical, or even impossible. But the majority see the future as it could be and have the courage to choose the right way forward. They have the courage to transform the impossible from a dream into reality. We, as humankind, are standing at a crossroads, and the choice is between two opposite futures. One that we fear, and another one that we can become proud of and look forward to. We know which one is the obvious choice, but we must choose. The future is in our hands.